All right, it's looking like our crowd has assembled. I think the entries have slowed a little bit enough that we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Murph Krajewski. I'm the VP of Marketing at Sharpen. We're here to talk about some credit union specific problems that are plaguing the industry today, and even better, how you can start to overcome those things. So omnichannel is a big one to start with. It's one of those words like personalization or big data. It's quickly gotten a spot as a kind of a CX buzzword, and it's overused, obviously, as a buzzword, and it often gets abused. But at the heart of every great member experience is an interaction that's really easy to navigate for both your members and for your MSRs. Fun fact, you may not have known that about 70% of members are actually interacting with their credit union through more than one digital channel each week. And of that 70%, almost 60% of them are also showing up to your physical branch. So clearly there's a lot going on here. There's a lot of things to unpack. I'm no credit union expert myself, so I invited a couple of friends here. I'm pleased once again to be joined by Veronica Stauffer, Senior Director of Advisory Services at MNet. How's it going, Veronica?
It's going well. Hi, Murph.
Great. And we're also joined by Jeremy Drinkard, the Senior Director of Implementation Services at MNet. Jeremy, how you doing?
Doing fantastic, Murph. How about yourself?
I'm good. I'm actually sitting in an office of one of our partner organizations in Salt Lake City. So that's why I mentioned our webinar might start at 12:05 if you got confused that it's not 2:05 where you're sitting. I'm in a different part of the world than I'm used to being in. So let's jump in. Implementing a true omni-channel experience for members it can be a daunting undertaking. So Veronica, let's just get started. What's the most critical first step when we're starting that process?
I'm going to just start on a positive note for that. The good news, credit unions are currently ranked out of all industries third in customer satisfaction. So the good news is that CUs are completely on the right track right now. That also means, of course, for any individual CU that your competition is too. So for those CUs that are looking to bring in a true omni-channel experience to their membership, the first step, and I'm not going to candy coat this, can be the most painful, and it's for any organization. The first step really is to take a brutally honest assessment of where you are today with your member experience, meaning you need to look at the good, the bad, the ugly, and that also includes considering what the cost of modernization is. So during this process, it's important to keep in mind that your members don't consider your individual departments or channels as separate experiences. And I'm making air quotes here. It doesn't matter if the interactions are online, if they come and see you in person, or they're calling you on the phone. So from a member's point of view, they can be working with a loan officer or just simply transferring money through a mobile app. It's all the same to them. So it's for a member, the sum of all of these different interactions is greater than its parts. So all of the interactions make up their experience. So having said all of that, it sounds very trite, but walk a mile in the shoes of your membership, and you're taking this look at where you are today. So that means become a new member. Start mapping out that journey, beginning with looking onto your website, maybe opening a new account, go through the loan application process, see what it's like if you were to suspect fraud on your account, or you were to lose a debit card maybe. Whatever those scenarios are that your members are commonly experiencing. And then once you've walked through the scenarios, you can start to document where the gaps exist and where those gaps would exist that you could do something about to make that whole experience feel more streamlined. So a couple of things to just keep in mind as you're doing it are, how many times are you having to reach out to resolve one issue or to complete your transaction? And if you begin with one channel, so say you're using web chat, for example, how easy is it to transition to another channel such as phone call? Where does that continuity break down in communication? So all of these areas need to be identified in order to know what to fix. And also on the flip side, what's working well today?
Yeah, I love that you start with the member's journey. And I think that's a good place too, where we can kind of inject some generational differences into those member journeys as well. And of course, you hit on the omni-channel types of communication like voice and email and web chat. And the way that you're talking about it, though, sort of seems a little bit more fluid. So I'm wondering, do you have some examples of some omni-channel scenarios that maybe considered like that credit unions could move through this process?
Yes, and that's a really good point. I'm trying not to be too buzzwordy, but there's a difference between multiple channel types and true omni-channel communications. I guess the easiest illustration is to say a member contacts you by initiating a web chat, and during the course of that interaction, it becomes apparent that a phone call would be required or would simply just be more efficient. In order to complete that transaction. So where omni-channel and just multiple channels kind of diverge is what happens at this point. Does the member need to now place a phone call into your member services ACD and it possibly get routed to somebody different? Does the MSR who is handling the chat need to do some extra after call work time to fully document the record so the person who receives that phone call knows what's going on? Or does an extension call need to be replaced, which sometimes in some systems will take somebody completely out of the ACD and you don't have a lot of reporting on that. So these are examples of having multiple channel types. If someone has to call back in and that gets routed around. Conversely, omni-channel communications aren't limited by the means which the member has used to contact your staff. So that same MSR can transition between a web chat and a phone call without losing any of the continuity of the conversation. Same person, just working in different types of channels. So for an example, in an omni-channel scenario, say you have a member who's in the process of securing an auto loan. And while that application is being processed, the loan officer notes, oh, there's no W-2s on file for the applicant. The loan officer can now send the member a text with a URL for secure email and ask the member to take a picture of the W-2 on his phone and attach it to that email. And once that email is received back, the loan officer can text a receipt confirmation back to the member. So they've actually never had to speak, but it's a transaction that's using different types of channels, all in a very fluid way. Another example would be when a member is authenticated onto your online banking system, and maybe they're now looking at the mortgage rates and they're going back and forth to that page. At that point, you can have a chat bot on there that alerts the loan officer, and a loan officer can text that person and say, "Hey, I'm available to talk if you want to talk about these rates." So in other words, the communications are using a variety of interaction channels, but there's no disruptions based on how the member initially engaged with you.
Got it. That's a really kind of forward-thinking look at how to use omni-channel in a way that really just sort of, it feels like it matches the way we already live our lives today. So maybe it's just kind of bringing those two realms together.
Exactly.
I love that. Okay, Jeremy, you're on the hook. So once we've got it looked at of where we are compared to where we could be, what's the next step?
Yeah, absolutely. So, identifying where you are is highly important, of course, because we have to take an honest look as we were kind of looking through those the previous conversation. But our next step, of course, our next critical path piece is to really know and understand where we want to be. And so what that means is it's time to really examine and set the goals for the omnichannel experience itself. So we start at a very high level, of course, and then we just start to drill down into those details and kind of how we're going to get there. So for example, what is the overall objective that's driving that initiative, right? Is it, increasing market share through growth in consumer business deposits? Is it reducing operating costs through efficiencies and business processes? Like where are we trying to get to? So once we've determined that overarching goal from the organizational perspective, it's really just as important to communicate and translate that goal and information into the team, and that includes the individual levels. So what can each department do to support the goal in their operation, in their department? And how will an individual's focus be altered to support that initiative? And as you drill down, you consider how you will measure that improvement, because we certainly want to measure as we're moving through the process. Numbers such as asset size or market share percentage on an industry level are important, but they take a lot of time to put together and collate, and are not always the most efficient metrics to rely on during a process like this. So to keep our finger on the pulse throughout the process, we focus on those internal metrics, and those are improvements in like CSAT or customer satisfaction and NPS scores. And then we look at internal sales conversion rates from there.
Got it. Makes good sense. So everybody in the organization, from a company level, team level, individual level, everybody's got to know what their role is in driving back to that overarching goal of a good omni-channel member experience. So now we've got goals, okay? Veronica, how do we determine what that experience should look like?
Here's where you get to do your research. So first thing you'll want to do is look at what the other credit unions are doing. Some of them are doing a fantastic job. So you can look for success stories. There's lots of case studies out there of people of different credit unions who have implemented those seamless omni-channel kind of experiences. But just as importantly, you can look at where others have struggled to get this in. So a few places to really focus is on eliminating those digital silos. So no longer thinking of, okay, we have online, we have mobile app, and then we have our member services. This is should be all working in tandem and in concert with each other. So look at how their systems, including their core, are integrated on the back end. And then at the front of the house, look at how their branches have evolved. And a lot of the credit unions are very forward thinking. The graph you have up right now is where folks are today when they were surveyed at the end of 2018 on looking to really bring in and digitalize the experience. So they're looking at many of them were planning for this year to invest in the video collaboration piece. AI and machine learning are huge. Chatbots out on your online and on your online banking and working in tandem with your member services group are huge, as well as blockchain. So while many of them are already we're planning to invest this year, even more so are already starting to discuss it at the executive level. So the second thing you can do, though, is after credit unions is make your staff part of the solution. This always helps with change management. So change the question from where do you struggle with our technology? What do you hate about everything? To what kind of technology would make your life easier when you're working with the members? And do the same and request the feedback from your membership. Find out right now what frustrates them, but also what would make things, make the relationship more convenient with your organization. People are your staff and your members, very techy these days. They have lots of these digital interactions. So with retail and all kinds of other organizations, so they have some really good ideas. And then look at your data. What channels are your members adopting and what do they seem to struggle with? So you can look at what you've already deployed and how well is that going, and where that'll show you some of the gaps as well. The nice thing, though, about member experience is that when you're doing the research, you don't have to stick straight with financial services. It's the primary focus of every service industry. So there's businesses out there who are renowned for their excellent omnichannel experience that you can really take some lessons from. These, Amazon, Zappos, and their 10-hour call, these are, the juggernauts, obviously, of all of this that people are familiar with. but also look at what Disney does for their experience. Virgin Atlantic has a wonderful CSAT. Its passengers love them. REI, Starbucks, Sephora, and even Walgreens with their mobile app and prescription refills and all of that, all get very, very high marks in Omnichannel because it is completely seamless. They each use their Omnichannel to anticipate their customers' needs and what their customers would want to do next. So they're all doing this through different ways, but the one thing they all keep in mind is that their customers' behavior is dictating the journey. And so these companies are ultimately just making it really easy to do business with them.
And I mean, let's get down to what this really means too. I mean, you could do some industry research with a ticket to a Disney park every so often. Right?
Absolutely.
It might be nice. No, I'm not going to Disney World for the fun of it. I'm working.
That's right.
Okay,
all
so
about
Jeremy,
the experience and the intel.
Right.
Yes.
So Jeremy, once we've got this great intel, like what do we do with it now?
So here's where we set out to make our plan. So we'll use that gap assessment that we documented when walking in the members' shoes previously, when we were kind of taking a step back and walking in their shoes, and we'll start to isolate those particular moments that disproportionately shape the experience along the way. So these are kind of our gaps in that journey. So we'll start with the member experience transformation. It's obviously important to focus on the end-to-end journey and not just those human touch points. For example, are there long wait times that are sort of overshadowing helpful staff? I know that sometimes waiting for a long time, even if you get the friendliest person, you're already kind of perturbed by that point. So it can really overshadow that. Do members have to repeat information over and over and over again to multiple staff before it actually gets resolved? And then we want to start to determine the process and outline those limitations. So we define roles. We document the gaps, not only in the technology, but also in the current skill set or the process. For example, do you have resources who are skilled at design or journey mapping or change management, and kind of putting those roles and responsibilities on the table so that everybody knows kind of what's going on and who's going to do what. And then in addition to the gaps you define, it's very, very important, of course, to identify areas where you have little or no visibility. These areas can become sort of those gotcha points if they get ignored. And if you're able to identify them earlier, they can be addressed if they come up in the process. So really what it comes down to is kind of thinking big and then breaking it down. We take that big picture view of the initiative and some effective approaches that we've used historically for starting on the right foot are, starting with a small pilot program. So these are often things that have a high probability of success and a high exposure rate within the organization so that you can get that win right out of the gate. Next, we want to segment the remaining projects by impact, effort, and cost so that we can kind of build that roadmap out from there. And then, of course, regardless of the size, effort, or cost, everything that you're doing in this particular area should support that big picture, that big initiative within the organization.
I love that final thought. Like at every step that we take through this thing, whether we're looking at tools or we're looking at processes or we're setting goals or measurements, everything always has to come back to that number one most important issue is how is it affecting the member experience and how is it affecting the MSRs that are providing that experience? I love that. So we're essentially talking about the old adage of, how do you eat an elephant? You just one bite at a time. You just start small and you just get into it. So, okay, before we close off, sorry, I hit my mute button there.
Oops.
Any last thoughts on where credit unions should focus once they have their baseline research, once they've got their plan in hand? Like, how do we get started on this thing?
Yeah, I have a couple of thoughts on that too. So, to prioritize, highly impactful projects to support seamless and omni-channel member experiences, here's how I would start. The first part is kind of that core integration. So integrating with the core into whatever communication platform you're using. So you should do that integration piece. So you integrate with information contained in the core, and it can help to reduce talk times by authenticating members up front who call in, help detect fraud, track authentication attempts, all kinds of things. It can also help to mitigate call volume by providing self-service options to callers, like balance inquiries or last X number of transactions, just to name a couple of things. And this type of integration can also be used to provide, targeted messaging to high-value consumer and business accounts. So, there's a lot that can be done with that. And finally, as Omnichannel continues to mature, it's critical that we address those digital silos. Mobile banking, web banking, direct contact with staff, they all need to be working in concert to support the overall CU, brand, as it were. So it's really one unit that operates in several different channels.
Love it. It's just that whole idea of the kind of journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step, right? Like at some point, you just got to get started and get into it. And along the way, if you find that you need help, reach out and get some help,
Absolutely.
maybe from some folks at MNet or Sharpen or whoever it may be. Like we're all here to kind of help get this thing through. So, all right, let me wrap us up, guys. Thanks for joining me. Thanks as always for your thoughts. Those of you who are watching, just as a thank you for joining us, we've put together what we call the Digital Transformation Toolkit. This is just a small collection of really practical, hands-on, research-based resources that we're going to send you. It'll probably be early next week. You don't have to do anything but watch your inbox, and we're going to send you a link to it. So you can grab those things and just kind of start sorting through, like, where does your brutal assessment take you today? And what is the experience that you want to create for your members? And what's it going to take to get from point A to point B? And what resources do you need and what help do you need to ask for along the way? So this toolkit will be a really good way to kind of get into that and get started. All right. Once again, my name is Murph Krajewski with Sharpen. Thanks to Veronica. Thanks to Jeremy from MNet. Guys, it's always fun chatting with you. Thanks to those of you who joined us today. And if you want to catch up on this, then the recording will be made available as well if you want to share it to somebody else or know somebody who maybe wanted to join but didn't quite make it to the time today. All right. I'm just going to wrap us up here. Thanks, everybody, for joining us today. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks, Murph.